They packed her bag before she even knew what was happening, didn't let her defend herself, didn't let her ask why, just pointed at the gate and wiped her name off the roster like she was nothing. Like 6 years of service meant less than a signature on paper. And the men who signed that paper, they thought they were safe. They thought she was just another face in formation. Clean boots, quiet voice, someone who'd disappear without a fight. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the woman they just expelled wasn't training to be in their world. She was already operating in another one entirely. A sealed detachment, a classified assignment, orders that existed above their rank and outside their chain of command. And 3 hours after they kicked her out, a Navy SEAL Blackhawk dropped through the cloud cover and landed on their parade ground. Right there, in front of everyone. Now you might be wondering what happened when that bird touched down, what the base commander said when he realized who she actually was. But before we get to that moment, the one that froze every instructor on that deck, let me take you back to where it started, to the morning fog, to the accusations, to the moment Sarah Holt stood in front of her entire unit and heard words that would have destroyed anyone else. This isn't a story about getting kicked out. It's about walking back in. On a bird no one saw coming. Mist hung low over West Ridge Naval Training Center that morning. Not thick enough to ground operations, just present, clinging to the chain link, softening the edges of buildings that had stood there for decades. The kind of gray that never really burned off, it just lingered. Gulls circled the rusted antenna towers, their cries sharp and distant. The steel cables on the flagpole clanged in rhythm, steady, metallic, like a heartbeat no one asked for. Recruits stood in 2 rows on the parade ground. Navy, Marines, a few cross rates, boots squared, shoulders tight. This wasn't unusual. Once a week they lined up for performance evaluations, inspection scores, maybe an admin notice that carried weight. It was always quiet before announcements. The kind of quiet you didn't break unless you wanted everyone remembering your name for the wrong reasons. Petty Officer Sarah Holt stood at the far end of the second row. She wasn't the type who joked during PT or whispered during rifle maintenance. But she was sharp, uncomfortably so. While others memorized routine, Sarah dissected it. 6 years fleet side, convoy operations, detachment security, Bahrain logistics under live fire. This cross-rate into naval special operations support wasn't a novelty for her. It was tactical repositioning. She didn't want a trident, she wanted to work behind the ones who did. Make sure their systems didn't collapse when it mattered. Her uniform was precise, boots unscuffed, name taped tight. A faint scar curved along her wrist, blast fragment from 3 years back, fully healed, but it still drew whispers. She's too sharp for her own good. Caught 2 inventory errors last week, reported them straight to command. Doesn't understand how things work here. Chief Dalton didn't hide his opinion, called her a clipboard ninja, said she thought like a lawyer and moved like a spy. Others nodded along. Safer that way. Sarah stood still, eyes forward, but even she noticed the shift today, not the fog, the tension. Something was misaligned. Ensign Teller, a junior admin barely out of OCS, walked past with a clipboard. His eyes caught hers for half a second. He opened his mouth, then looked down and kept walking. The deck was too quiet. The PA system crackled. Petty Officer Holt, front and center, she moved. No confusion, no hesitation. Just measured steps to the front of formation. As she approached, instructors turned slightly. Dalton crossed his arms. Another scribbled something in a folder without looking up. Sarah stopped 3 paces from the commandant, heels together, reporting as ordered, sir. What came next didn't feel like an order. It felt like a script someone else had already written. Captain Rowan didn't clear his throat, didn't shuffle papers. He lifted a folder from the podium and spoke in a tone that made the entire formation stiffen. Petty Officer Sarah Holt. Effective immediately, you are administratively separated from West Ridge Naval Training Center. A ripple went through the ranks, small, involuntary, instantly regretted. Sarah didn't move. Her breathing stayed level, but inside the silence something clicked into place. A few recruits exchanged glances. Even the gulls overhead seemed to hold still. Rowan continued, voice clipped. Grounds for separation include falsified training documentation, unauthorized modification of issued gear, and conduct unbecoming during evaluation drills. Sarah blinked once, not from shock, from calculation. None of it matched anything she'd done. "Sir," she said, steady, respectful. "May I request clarification on the documentation?" Chief Dalton stepped forward before Rowan could answer. "Not the time, hold." Rowan didn't contradict him. He just closed the folder. "Your appeal options are in the packet. You'll be escorted to the gate." There was no packet, but there was a duffel bag, hers, already packed, sealed, sitting beside the podium like someone knew this would happen today, like her dismissal had been rehearsed. Two instructors moved toward her, not aggressive, just certain. Men who believed a process had already run its course. Behind her, whispers leaked through. "She got kicked. For what? That doesn't sound right. Dalton's been after her since the inspection logs." Sarah's eyes stayed ahead. Dalton held out her badge. The magnetic strip had been scored, deactivated. "We'll take this," he said. No smirk, no malice, just finality. She unpinned it, handed it over. As she reached for her duffel, Rowan added one more line: "Training integrity is non-negotiable. Dismissal stands." Sarah lifted the bag onto her shoulder. The weight felt wrong, too neatly arranged, packed by someone else's hands, someone who expected her departure before she did. The instructors escorted her toward the gravel path. She passed the comm shed. She caught Ensign Teller again, standing near the door. The second their eyes met, he spun and hurried inside, shut the door a little too fast. Interesting. She reached the gate. The MP scanned her uniform, confused. "Ma'am, you're leaving training." "She's done," Dalton said, flashing the deactivated badge. Sarah stepped through. The gate closed behind her with a metallic thunk. Badge gone, clearance revoked. Accusations she couldn't answer, and a base that suddenly acted like she'd never belonged. Sarah kept walking, alone. The coastal access road curved along the bluff, just wide enough for two service trucks to squeeze past each other. Sarah walked it alone. The only sound was the distant chuff of waves against rock and the dry rustle of eucalyptus overhead. Her duffel bounced against her hip. The strap dug into the same shoulder that once held a weapons crate through a sandstorm. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger didn't come in moments like this, not if you were trained. Civilians jogged the nearby path. Two older men in sweatpants, a young woman with a stroller and earbuds in. One of them gave her a polite nod, eyes flicking from her uniform to her bag, trying to work out why someone in military gear was walking away from a base with no escort. He didn't ask, she didn't explain. She kept walking until the perimeter fence blurred behind the trees, then stopped at a weather-worn bench facing the bay, dropped her bag, sat, pulled out a small notepad from the outer pouch. Not military issue, just personal, corners curled from sun, pages lined with coordinates. Initials, log times, her handwriting neat, exact. The sea mist had faded. The air tasted sharp and salt bitter. Her fingers tapped twice against the notepad's spine, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out a slim black phone, private line, tapped in a number she hadn't used in 6 months. No name, no back and forth, just one line: "Issue at West Ridge. Need 10 minutes to explain." She hit send. No reply. She hadn't expected one. A long breath settled in her lungs. She leaned back, eyes half closed, remembering, not wistfully, tactically. Convoy 3 Alpha, southern route, no radio coverage, fractured axle, enemy presence inside 300 meters. She'd coordinated evac while maintaining fire discipline and keeping 2 injured Marines conscious through blood loss and shock. That was 4 years ago, before the cross rate, before West Ridge, before men like Dalton decided she was a problem because she wouldn't look the other way. Her phone buzzed. One word: understood. That was it. No questions, no promises, just acknowledgement. Sarah slipped the phone back into her pocket, stood, adjusted the duffel strap, and kept walking, not toward anything, just away, for now, because sometimes you don't fight in the moment. You let the system show its hand, and then you watch it collapse under the weight of its own lies. 3 hours, that's how long it took. 3 hours from the moment they expelled her to the moment a Navy SEAL Blackhawk appeared in the sky above West Ridge. No warning, no radio chatter, just the sudden thump of rotor blades cutting through the mist. Recruits were running drills on the obstacle course. Instructors were reviewing scores in the admin building. Captain Rowan was signing off on weekly reports. And then the sound hit. Low, powerful, unmistakable. Everyone stopped. Heads turned toward the sky. The Blackhawk descended fast, professional, precise. It didn't circle, didn't request clearance. It just dropped through the cloud cover and settled onto the parade ground like it owned the space. Dust kicked up in spirals, the rotors stayed hot. And from the open side door a SEAL officer stepped out, not in full kit, just fatigues, but the way he moved, calm, deliberate, unbothered, told you everything you needed to know. This wasn't a courtesy visit. Captain Rowan came out of the admin building. Face tight, confused, he crossed the gravel quickly. "Sir," he said, "we weren't notified of any inbound. The SEAL officer didn't let him finish. I'm here for Petty Officer Sarah Holt." Rowan blinked. There was a pause long enough to feel uncomfortable. "She's no longer assigned here," Rowan said carefully. "We processed her separation this morning." The officer tilted his head slightly. "Separated? On what grounds?" Rowan hesitated, then gestured back toward the building. "If you'd like to review the no," the officer said. His voice was flat. "Final. I'd like you to explain why you expelled an operator embedded under Joint Command authorization without consulting the detachment she reports to." The air changed. Rowan's expression shifted, from confusion to something closer to dread. "What detachment?" The officer reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, opened it without ceremony. Petty Officer Holt was assigned to a classified operational audit, approved 6 weeks ago through Detachment 4, vetted by Joint Command. He passed the folder forward. Rowan hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 3 documents. Authorization memo signed by Commander, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Assignment transfer orders listing Sarah Holt as Operational Safety Oversight Liaison. And a letter of intent. Classified mission prep for high-risk systems audit in live detachment theater. Sarah remained silent until Rowan looked up and said carefully, "No one informed us." "I did," Sarah said, 2 weeks ago, through secure internal comms." She reached into her bag, handed over a printed copy of her original log submission, marked with an earlier timestamp than any of the expulsion paperwork. "And this," she held up another page, photocopied, "is the gear inspection log they claimed I falsified." It had her name typed at the top, but the signature, a printed image, not handwritten. "And my inspection timestamp places me inside the comms building," she added, "on camera with 2 witnesses." Rowan looked to Chief Dalton, who stood stiffly beside the other instructors, face drained of color. The SEAL officer turned slowly. "You altered training documents to bury an error flagged by someone placed here to find those exact failures. That's not carelessness. That's a breach of command." Dalton tried to open his mouth. Nothing came out. A corporal from admin approached. "Sir, the JAG liaison is already on the line. They want to review all files related to the expulsion." Rowan nodded tightly. "Chief Dalton, you're relieved, pending investigation." The instructors behind him didn't move. One looked down, another took a half step back. Dalton didn't argue, he just stared at Sarah like he'd seen a ghost, because in a way he had. He'd buried someone he thought was powerless. And now, in front of the entire base, she'd returned with every layer of truth. It didn't take long after that. The SEAL officer handed the transfer manifest directly to base operations, bypassing protocol with quiet authority. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence carried bureaucratic immunity. He wasn't just high clearance. He was outside their chain entirely. "I'm requesting immediate reinstatement of Petty Officer Holt under operational authority," he said. "As of this moment, she is no longer assigned to West Ridge. She is ours." Captain Rowan looked down at the document again, then back at Sarah. The embarrassment wasn't personal. It was institutional. He had signed off on her expulsion without vetting it. He had chosen the words of his senior instructors over the silence of a subordinate. "Consider her status corrected," he said quietly. Sarah offered no nod of gratitude. She simply held her bearing as the security lock was removed from her bag and her name was cleared from the dismissal list. A young logistics officer retrieved her duffel, approached with both hands, offering it back like he was returning a folded flag. "Ma'am," he said softly. She took it, adjusted the strap over her shoulder, and for the first time since sunrise, her shadow rejoined the base like it had never left. Recruits nearby had stopped pretending not to watch. A few stood at parade rest, unsure of protocol. One of them, a younger Marine with boot-fresh energy and scuffed sleeves, muttered just loud enough for his buddy to hear. She wasn't nobody. The Blackhawk waited on the gravel like a judgment rendered in steel. Its rotors slowed now, not silent but steady, as if holding space for only one passenger. Sarah stepped forward. The SEAL officer stood beside the open side door. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened by a fraction. "You ready?" She nodded once, always was. As she moved to board, she paused beside Captain Rowan, who still stood near the chalked perimeter line, hands at his sides. He looked older now, not defeated, just humbled. She spoke plainly. No malice, no arrogance. Training only works when standards are real. Then she turned and climbed inside. There was no applause, no fanfare, no shouted orders. But on the far end of the compound, Chief Dalton was being quietly escorted toward the security annex. 2 MPs flanking him now. Inside the helicopter, the crew chief offered her a headset. Sarah took it, secured her harness, face forward, without looking back. The aircraft lifted seconds later, dust kicking up in a slow spiral beneath them. And for everyone standing below, from the stunned recruits to the instructors who said nothing, the message had landed harder than the Blackhawk ever could. They hadn't just expelled the wrong person. They had expelled the one person who was exactly where she was supposed to be. The Blackhawk banked low over the coastline, hugging the cliffs. Sarah sat upright in the rear compartment, strapped in beside a stack of folded netting and an auxiliary fuel canister. Her helmet rested in her lap. The thrum of the rotors wasn't comforting exactly, but it was familiar. Every vibration hummed through the harness at her chest like a second heartbeat. The view outside was all Pacific and sky. No fences, no ranks, no clipboard protocol. The crew chief glanced back. Offered her a water bottle. She took it with a nod. "Most people we pick up," he said after a beat, "usually wave or cheer or I don't know, flip the bird." Sarah gave a slight shrug. "I'm not most people." The SEAL officer seated across from her smiled faintly. He hadn't spoken since they lifted off. Now he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his thighs. "You could have fought back," he said. "The minute they called you out, brought up your assignment, invoked the transfer." "I wasn't there to flash clearance," she replied. "I was there to see how they handled standards." The crew chief raised an eyebrow. "So they failed. They revealed themselves," Sarah said. "Which was the point?" The officer nodded once. "Joint Command reviewed your inspection notes last week. You weren't just accurate. You were the only one who caught the breach pattern. Because I used to run the audit logs they all pretend don't matter." He looked at her a moment longer, then leaned back against the interior wall. The faintest hint of approval flickered across his face. Not admiration, not praise, just recognition. The kind that didn't need a salute to land. Outside, the coastline dropped away into open water. The cliffs gave way to ocean and sky. The horizon stretched clean as the day it was first mapped. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the wind pressure ripple over her skin through the open side panel. She wasn't thinking of Dalton or the commandant or even the recruits. She was already beyond them. The crew chief spoke up again, quieter this time. "Why didn't you tell them who you were assigned to?" Sarah's eyes opened. She looked out the window. Watched the sea shift from gray to deep blue. "Because people show their truth when they think you're powerless." The officer across from her nodded just once. And that was the end of it. The aircraft banked again, turning inland toward the next ridge, its rotors lost in the sound of salt, wind, and steel. Sarah Holt didn't look back, because nothing behind her needed correcting. Only the mission ahead. And somewhere, miles below, a base was learning a lesson it should have known from the beginning. Rank doesn't protect you from the truth, and silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it just means you're waiting for the right moment to prove everyone wrong, not with words, not with anger, but with something far more powerful: integrity. The kind that doesn't need defending, because it speaks for itself. Every single time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.